Claire Merritt made it 4 steps out of the hospital before the hand closed around her throat. No warning, no words, just pressure and concrete and the overhead lights spinning above her as her back hit the pillar. The man in front of her wore a Callaway PD badge. His arm was across her windpipe. His eyes were completely calm. She tried to show him her ID. He ripped it off her lanyard and dropped it on the ground without looking at it. He had already looked at it. That was the part nobody understood at first. Not the crowd gathering with their phones raised. Not the reporters who would pick up the story by morning. Officer Dale Harmon knew exactly who Claire Merritt was. He just didn't think she would be a problem. He was wrong about that. What happens next will change everything they thought they knew about the quiet nurse who never pushed back. Before we continue, kindly hit the like button and subscribe for more story like this. Now let's continue. Claire Merritt had been an ER nurse at Midland County General for 7 years. She was good at it the way certain people are good at things that require them to stay calm while everything around them falls apart. She didn't panic. She didn't freeze. She moved through chaos with a steadiness that the newer nurses mistook for detachment, and the older ones recognized as something harder earned than that. She worked the night shift by choice. Fewer administrators, less noise, just the work, which was the only part she had ever cared about anyway. Her husband James was the hospital's chief of surgery. They had met during his residency, married quietly 3 years later, and built a life that existed mostly inside these walls. Same building, different floors, occasionally the same cafeteria at 2 in the morning, when neither of them could sleep. People at the hospital knew them as a unit. Dr. and Mrs. Merritt. Steady. The kind of couple that made chaos look manageable. What most people at the hospital did not know was that Claire had spent 6 years before nursing school attached to a classified forward surgical unit operating in 3 different countries that she was not permitted to name in any public context. Her personnel file listed her prior service as Federal Contractor, Medical Division. Her discharge papers were sealed at a level that made the HR director's eyes go wide the day she was hired, and then go carefully blank as she filed them without asking questions. James knew she had served. He knew it had been dangerous. He knew there were things she would never tell him, and he had made his peace with that a long time ago. Claire never talked about it. It belonged to a version of herself that she had put down deliberately and with both hands, and she had no interest in picking it back up. 3 weeks before the night in the parking lot, a man named Gerald Tate had come through Claire's trauma bay. He was 54 years old, a delivery driver with a broken wrist and 4 cracked ribs, and a story that changed twice before he settled on the version he was willing to say out loud. Claire had treated his injuries, documented everything with the precision she applied to all her documentation, and asked him once quietly, after the second resident had left the room, whether he wanted her to call anyone. He had looked at her for a long moment. Then he said the name, Dale Harmon. Claire had written it in her notes. Standard procedure. She had also, because she was someone who paid attention to patterns, and Tate was not the first patient she had treated in the past year who had said that name in that particular tone, flagged the notation for the hospital's patient advocacy office. She had not thought about it again after that. She should have. On the night of December 12th, Claire finished a shift that had included a stroke patient, 2 overdoses, and a 14-year-old with a broken arm whose father she had to ask to leave the room because he was making things worse. She clocked out at 11:47. She pulled her coat on, pushed through the sliding doors, and stepped into the cold. The parking lot was quiet. The overhead lights buzzed in their metal housings and cast everything in a pale yellowish wash that made the asphalt look wet even when it wasn't. She got 4 steps. The hand came from her left, fast and certain, grabbing her shoulder, and spinning her around before she could process the footsteps she had not heard coming. Her back hit the concrete pillar beside the ambulance bay, and the impact drove the air from her lungs. The man in front of her was in uniform. Callaway Police Department, badge number 214. His hand was on her arm, and his other hand was near his belt, and his eyes were the eyes of someone who had already decided how this was going to go. Claire's training did not announce itself. It never did. It simply moved beneath the surface of her, quiet and ready, and assessed the situation in the time it took her to drag in her first shallow breath. She showed him her badge. He looked at it. His expression did not change. He reached out, grabbed the lanyard, and pulled until the clip snapped. Then he dropped it on the ground between them. He had already read it. She understood then that this was not a mistake. This was not a case of wrong place, wrong time, wrong person. He had come here knowing exactly who she was. Around them, a crowd was forming. Phones were rising. Someone shouted. A woman's voice said, "She's a nurse, she works here," and Harmon's arm only pressed harder against Claire's collarbone in response. Then the hospital doors burst open. James came through them in his surgical scrubs, stethoscope still around his neck, and when he saw what was happening, his voice came out at a register Claire had never heard from him before. "Get your hands off my wife." Harmon's grip loosened. Not much, but enough. The video was everywhere by morning. Claire hadn't slept. She sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea she hadn't touched, while James moved quietly around her, making calls, talking in low, urgent tones to people whose names she didn't catch. The bruises on her throat had deepened overnight, purple and precise, the shape of a forearm pressed against skin. Her phone rang 40 times before she stopped looking at it. By noon, a county deputy named Reyes had taken her statement. By 2 in the afternoon, the hospital's legal team was involved. By 4, the Callaway PD had placed Harmon on administrative leave pending internal review. Administrative leave. James said the words out loud, and then sat very still, like he was deciding whether to say anything else. Claire looked at him. "I know. That's it?" he asked. "For now," she said. She wasn't surprised. She had spent enough time in enough places to understand that systems protected themselves first. That was not cynicism. That was just how institutions worked, and knowing how things worked was the first step toward changing them. What she didn't know yet was how deep it went. Captain Rosa Vega arrived at their house the next morning. She was with the state attorney's office, sharp-eyed and direct, and she sat across from Claire at the kitchen table with a folder that she opened without preamble. "I've been watching Dale Harmon for 8 months, Vega said. "Your case just gave me what I needed to move." Claire looked at the folder. "What's in there?" Vega turned it around. 6 complaints filed against Harmon in 3 years. Excessive force, unlawful detention, intimidation of witnesses, every single one handled internally. Every single one resulting in additional training and return to duty. James leaned forward. "They knew. And there's more." She pulled out a second document. "Harmon didn't choose you randomly. Gerald Tate filed a formal complaint against him 2 weeks ago. Your name was in the supporting documentation as the treating nurse who flagged the incident." Claire felt something settle cold in her chest. "He came for me because of Tate." Vega nodded. "He thought he could scare you into recanting the notation, into making the complaint go away quietly before it gained traction." She paused. "He miscalculated." Claire looked at the bruises on her wrist, the precise documentation of what he had done to her. "Yes," she said, "he did." The criminal charges came 4 days later: assault and battery, unlawful detention, excessive use of force. The county prosecutor, a woman named Andrea Cole, called Claire personally to tell her. "We have the video," Cole said. "We have 17 witness statements. We have your medical documentation, and we have his complaint history. This is not a complicated case, but Claire, I need you to be ready. His union is already involved. His lawyer is already talking to the press. They are going to try to make this about you." Claire was quiet for a moment, What do they have on me? Cole's voice was careful. Your prior service record. The sealed portions of it. They've been pushing to have it unsealed, arguing it's relevant to your character and your capacity for physical confrontation. Claire's jaw tightened. My medical record from 7 years of saving lives is sealed for national security reasons. I know, Cole said, and the judge has denied their motion. But I'm telling you, because you should know they tried. After the call ended, Claire sat in the hospital break room and thought about Gerald Tate, about the way he had said Harmon's name, about the 6 complaints that had gone nowhere, and the people behind each one of them who had tried to tell the truth and been ignored. She thought about the fact that she could have been one of them. If James hadn't come through those doors, if the crowd hadn't formed, if 17 people hadn't raised their phones at exactly the right moment, she could have been a notation in a file that nobody read. The threats started on the 5th day. The first was an email, anonymous, 4 words, drop it or else. The second was a note on her car, handwritten in block letters, we know where you live. The third was a phone call at 2 in the morning, no voice, just breathing, then a click. Claire documented all 3, photographed the note before she handed it to Vega, forwarded the email before she deleted it, recorded the phone call's incoming number, already knowing it would trace to a burner. Then she went to work. She changed into scrubs. She walked into the ER where 2 patients were waiting, and the monitors were beeping, and the work was exactly what it had always been. Concrete, fixable, hers. Diane, the senior nurse who had worked at Midland County General since before Claire was born, fell into step beside her without comment, handed her a patient chart, kept walking. That was all Claire needed. Vega called that evening with something that changed everything. The 6 complaints against Harmon, Vega said, were not isolated. We've been cross-referencing incident reports across the department for the past 8 months. The pattern goes deeper than one officer. How much deeper? Claire asked. Vega was quiet for a moment. We think Harmon has been operating with the active support of at least 4 senior officers. People who buried the complaints. People who coached him on how to avoid accountability. People who saw what he was doing and made sure the paperwork said otherwise. Claire stared at the wall. This isn't about one bad cop, Vega said. This is about a department that built a system around protecting him. And Claire, she paused, your case is the first time someone with the documentation, the witnesses, and the credibility to make it stick has been willing to go all the way. Are you asking if I'm willing? Claire said. I'm asking if you understand what all the way actually means. Claire thought about Gerald Tate, about the 6 complaints, about the forearm across her throat and the badge dropped on the pavement, and the eyes of a man who had been certain she would not be a problem. Yes, she said, I understand. Good, Vega said, because tomorrow morning the FBI wants to talk to you. Special Agent Dana Cross was not what Claire expected. She was in her late 30s, calm in the way that people were calm when they had seen considerably worse than this, and had decided not to be rattled by anything below a certain threshold. She sat across from Claire in a conference room at the Callaway field office and opened her laptop without ceremony. We've been building a civil rights case against the Callaway PD for 6 months, Cross said. What Harmon did to you in that parking lot is the visible edge of something much larger. She turned the laptop around. On the screen was a network map, names connected by lines, dates, incident numbers. Claire scanned it and felt her stomach drop. How many people? She asked. Cross's expression didn't change. 11 officers, 3 supervisors, 1 deputy chief who signed off on every internal review that should have ended Harmon's career 3 years ago. James put his hand flat on the table. A deputy chief. Cross looked at him. The complaints didn't fail because the system was broken. They failed because specific people inside the system were making sure they failed. That's the difference between negligence and conspiracy. Claire looked at the network map, at the lines connecting Harmon to the people above him, at the dates that showed how long this had been running. Quietly, efficiently, beneath the surface of a department that was supposed to protect the county it served. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Your testimony," Cross said. "At trial. All of it. The parking lot, the threats, the notation about Tate that put you on Harmon's radar. You are the thread that connects the visible incident to the systemic cover-up. Without you, this stays a local story. With you, it becomes a federal case." Claire looked at James. He looked back at her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "When does it start?" The trial of Dale Harmon began on a Tuesday in March. Claire walked into the courthouse with James on her left and Vega on her right, and did not look at the cameras. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, supporters, protesters, all of them pressing against the edges of the space, like water finding the shape of its container. Harmon sat at the defense table in a gray suit. He looked smaller than she remembered. She had noticed that about people who had hurt her in the past. They always looked smaller when the context changed, when they were no longer the ones holding the power. He didn't look at her. She looked at him for a long time. The prosecutor, Andrea Cole, was precise and devastating. She walked the jury through the timeline without flourish. The shift change, the parking lot, the badge on the ground, the 17 witness statements. The video, from 11 different angles, showed a man who had seen the ID, heard the crowd, and kept going anyway. She paused the footage at the moment Harmon looked directly at the badge in his hand. "This," Cole said to the jury, "is not a split-second decision. This is a choice." The defense tried to make it about Claire, her sealed service record, her military training, her capacity for physical resistance. The implication threaded through every question. She could have done something, which meant somehow what happened was shared. Claire took the stand on the third day. Cole led her through it steadily. Claire answered every question in the same tone, calm, clear, exact. The tone of someone who had learned a long time ago that precision was its own form of force. When the defense lawyer stood for cross-examination, he asked her whether her military background had made her prone to escalation. Claire looked at him. "I spent 6 years keeping people alive in places where escalation would have gotten them killed," she said. "Calm is not something I perform. It is something I learned because the alternative cost lives." She paused. "What Officer Harmon did in that parking lot was not escalation on my part. It was a man who believed he was untouchable, making a choice he had made before and expected to make again." The lawyer looked at his notes, looked at the jury, sat down. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The federal trial came 8 weeks later. Cross had built the case with the methodical patience of someone who understood that rushing meant losing. 3 supervisors. The deputy chief who had signed his name to cover-up after cover-up for 3 years. Claire testified for 2 hours. She told the story once, clearly, from the beginning. The notation about Tate, the parking lot, the threats, the phone call at 2 in the morning, the way the system had been designed not to fail, but to protect the people doing the failing. When she finished, the courtroom was quiet, in the way rooms went quiet when something true had been said out loud, and there was nothing left to add to it. The verdicts came on a Friday afternoon. Harmon's 4 supporting officers convicted on federal civil rights charges. 2 supervisors convicted on conspiracy. The deputy chief convicted on obstruction and abuse of authority. Sentences ranging from 3 to 9 years. The department placed under a federal consent decree. Body cameras, independent oversight. Civilian review board with actual enforcement power. Claire sat in the courtroom and watched them led away one by one, and did not feel triumph. She felt the particular exhaustion of someone who had carried something heavy for a long time, and had finally been allowed to set it down. James found her hand in the gallery. "It's done," he said quietly. Almost, she said. 3 days later, Claire went back to work. She clocked in. She changed into scrubs. She walked into the ER, where the monitors were beeping and the patients were waiting, and the work was exactly what it had always been. Diane handed her a chart without comment. Then she stopped and looked at Claire with the expression of someone who had worked alongside people long enough to know when something in them had permanently shifted. "You okay?" Diane asked. Claire looked at the chart, at the patient name and the presenting symptoms and the room number, at the ordinary, urgent, specific reality of a person who needed help and had come to the right place. "Yes," she said. She meant it. At the end of her shift, Claire walked out through the sliding doors into the parking lot. The night was cold and clear. The overhead lights buzzed in their housings the same way they always had. She stopped at the concrete pillar, stood in the exact spot, looked at the pavement where her badge had fallen. Then she looked up, at the hospital behind her, at the lights burning in every window, at the building where she had spent 7 years learning that steadiness was not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving through it. She picked up her badge from her coat pocket, where she had been carrying it since they returned it to her as evidence. She clipped it back to her lanyard, and she walked to her car. If this story reminded you that the strongest people are often the quietest ones in the room, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. If you know someone who has been failed by a system that was supposed to protect them, share this with them. They need to know that fighting back is possible. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. The truth always costs something, but silence costs more.